Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Aspen Brain Institute's Expert Series 2.0. Welcome to our growing community of global seekers seeking to be educated and delighted at the cutting edge. Hello to people all over the US and 103 countries, all of whom have registered for this Series 2.0. Thank you all for tuning in. We're offering this new free series in order to build an online brain health community, all focused on brain health. We'd like to thank Lugano Diamonds for their generous support as our national underwriters. We thank Lugano Diamonds for choosing Aspen Brain Institute as a nonprofit worthy of their support and their values, and for making our Zoom Expert Series free to the public and able to be viewed worldwide. We also thank Alpine Bank for their generous support as our best community bank in Aspen. And we thank our partners at BrainFutures who have collaborated with us to produce our program today with our today's experts. BrainFutures is doing important work in advancing the practical application of the latest scientific understanding of the brain and learning in K-8 schools. At our Expert Series 2.0, you will hear global leaders, deep thinkers, technology experts, cutting edge experts, top-notch doctors, and extraordinary creatives. We hope the insights will transform how you care for your brain today that your 80-year-old brain will thank you for tomorrow. This Expert Series 2.0 underscores Aspen Brain Institute's mission to share the most basic research on brain health to increase brain health literacy and ultimately to create a brain healthy planet. It is my honor and privilege to bring you these new episodes. Let's see what we can learn and explore together. And now to our expert series. I want to introduce Holly McCormack, the Chief Strategy Officer at BrainFutures. She is going to introduce our two expert speakers and moderate a discussion between them. Holly, take it away.
Thank you, Glenda. It's wonderful to be here today, and thank you to the Aspen Brain Institute for this opportunity. It is, as somebody who has had the opportunity to speak to both Goldie Hawn and Dr. Bruce Wexler about brain-based approaches to optimize student outcomes, I am confident that the conversation today is going to be full of expertise, full of wisdom, full of passion, and absolutely full of heart. So I want to take just a quick moment to introduce our panel. Our first panelist, of course, needs absolutely no introduction, and that is Goldie Hawn. We all know her as an Academy Award-winning actress, but she is also the founder of the Goldie Hawn Foundation. And through her foundation, she has had the foresight to bring together neuroscientists and positive psychologists and educators and researchers and found the Mind Up program for pre-K through 8th grade students. So we're excited, Goldie, to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Holly. It's so good to see you.
And we are also joined by Bruce Wexler. Bruce is Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry and Senior Research Scientist at Yale School of Medicine. He's also an international leader in neuroscience research with an emphasis in neuroplasticity. And Bruce, if that wasn't enough, he's also developed the Activate program, which is a K-8 cognitive cross-training program, which he'll speak to more in a moment. Bruce's work has also made him the recipient of the NIH Director's Award for High Innovation, High Impact Research. And he is also the author of the book Brain and Culture, Neurobiology, Ideology, and Social Change. So Bruce, welcome. It's wonderful to have you today.
Thank you, Holly.
So before we get into the flow of our conversation today, I first wanted to start by kind of clarifying how all of three of our work connects. In my work with BrainFutures, as Glenda was saying, that organization is a nonprofit, national nonprofit that really focuses on accelerating the adoption of effective evidence-based neuroscientific applications to different segments of society that could benefit from these scientific breakthroughs. And one of those areas that we focus on is youth. And to that end, last year we released an issue brief that, that was about executive function school-based programs. And through the writing of that issue brief, we vetted over 40 of these executive function programs against an evidence-based standard that was set by a National Advisory Committee of esteemed experts. And of those 40 plus programs that we looked at, only 10 met that evidence-based threshold. And interestingly, those 10 pretty much fall into two categories of programs. And one of those categories is executive function specific training, which would be like computer-based training or executive function curriculums. And the other category of program was mindfulness-based program. And these programs also may have layered in either social and emotional learning components or physical movement components or brain literacy components to make the programs even more powerful and profound. We have the great pleasure of having two founders of two programs that were featured in the issue brief. And Goldie with the Mind Up program and Bruce with Activate. Both of those programs were featured. And we thought that it would be so important right now in light of all that is happening in our world with COVID and the at-home learning and parents and families wrestling to figure out how to do that the best they can, as well as with the mental health crisis that we're seeing. Certainly it was in the country before COVID, but that is being accelerated as a result of COVID. So we thought it would be important to have a conversation with Goldie and Dr. Wexler to help us learn more about the essential aspects of these types of brain-based programs in promoting academic outcomes as well as wellness outcomes for our youth. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Dr. Wexler, who's going to spend a few minutes just giving us an overview about what we need to know about executive function skills and why they're important in relationship to an educational context. And then after Bruce speaks to that, and we all have a little bit more of a level set knowledge, then Goldie will come on and speak a little bit about the Mind Up program. Bruce will speak a little bit about the Activate program, and then we'll all come together for a moderated conversation, which we're really looking forward to. So with that, Dr. Wexler.
Thanks, Holly. Well, there are two neuroscience concepts that provide the foundation for what Goldie and I want to talk to you all about this afternoon. One of them is executive function, executive cognitive function. The other one is neuroplasticity. Now, executive cognitive functions are a set of cognitive operations that include attention, self-control, working memory, and cognitive flexibility. And these functions actually predict academic success more powerfully than IQ. Not only academic success, it also predicts in terms of elementary school math and reading, but they also predict whether you graduate from high school, whether you're more likely to use substances and to succeed in life as an adult. One study, for example, assessed attention in third graders, 12,000 third graders in Toronto, and then followed them to see if they ever graduated from high school. Children with attention problems in third grade were at an 8-fold increased risk for becoming high school dropouts. Now, when I first read that, I asked myself, well, how many kids, what percentage of kids had such severe attention problems to put them at that risk? Was it just the 1% most extreme kids? Unfortunately, no. 17%, nearly 1 in 5 children in Toronto had attention problems severe enough in third grade to put them at an 8-fold increase of becoming high school dropouts. Another remarkable study followed 1,000 children for 30 years. They assessed their executive function when they're 3 to 5 years old. And they found, as did the other studies, that executive function at that age predicted math and reading achievement in elementary school. But if you have poor executive function when you're a child, you're more likely to use drugs and participate in unsafe sex as a high school student. And as a young adult, you're more likely to be unemployed, incarcerated, substance abuser, and have a variety of other health problems. So that's how important executive function is for life success and well-being. Our other foundational concept is neuroplasticity. This refers to the fact that the structure and function of our brains are shaped after birth by stimulation from the environment. Hubel and Wexler got the Nobel Prize for the work they did in the 1950s, showing in cat and chick brains, kittens and chicks, that stimulation after birth alter the structure and function of their brains. But the human brain is influenced in its structure and function by input from the environment far longer and to a far greater extent than the brains of any other animals. These effects are dramatic, and I could give you many examples, but just one. What happens when you're born blind? What do you think happens to the visual cortex, the big area in the back of your brain that processes visual information? Does it do nothing? No, it actually becomes another auditory processing area. Somehow the brain gets information from the ears now to that part of the brain, and that part of the brain reorganizes itself to process tonotopic instead of retinotopic information. Now, one way that the environment has this impact on our brains is by influencing gene expression. What parts of our DNA actually get turned on and turned off? You may have heard that our brains and chimpanzees' brains only differ in 1% in the DNA structure, but we differ dramatically in our function, especially our brain function. Our brains have 10 times more difference in what genes are turned on and off compared to chimpanzees than they do in the actual structure of the genes. Now, probably the most important thing about this is that humans are the only animals that shapes the environment that shapes its brain. So think about that. We call it cultural evolution. Very powerful process over the last 10,000 years. Our children today are raised almost exclusively in human-made environments. And when those environments are correct and supportive, they promote development of executive function skills, the foundation for lifelong learning and well-being. But on the flip side, if you happen to come from a disadvantaged background, you don't get the stimulation that your brain needs in order to develop these cognitive functions. And even worse, you get exposed to what we call adverse childhood experiences, exposure to trauma, high levels of stress. These actually compromise the physical development of those parts of the brain essential for promoting executive function. The major cause of the shameful gap in academic achievement in our country is compromised executive function. Now, some of you may know that Goldie and I recently published a op-ed piece, a warning about the effects of COVID on the rearing environment of children. The disruptions and stress in families, in schools, and communities are obvious to see. But we're so distracted in dealing with all of them that we haven't really spent the time we should thinking about how is this impacting the environment that's essential for increasing, for promoting development of a healthy brain and executive cognitive functions. We know from 30 years of research that poverty compromises the development of executive function. And we know that the same processes that compromise it in poverty are the ones that are being exacerbated by the disruptions in homes and communities from COVID. So these things together produce a huge risk, not only to our children, but to our whole society, because the COVID impact is greatest on the kids who can least afford it, who are already suffering in the poorer communities. And it's going to add to the disparities in our society that threaten the well-being of our whole society. Now, Holly referred to and described the wonderful report from BrainFutures. It's a very thoroughly researched report, very nicely written and presented, and I recommend it to all of you who haven't yet read it. But as she said, it identifies 10 different executive function programs, 10 different intervention programs for schools that can promote executive function development and Goldie and I, as Holly said, are each of us involved with one of those programs, and we've been asked to describe them both briefly today. And I want to point out to you that the programs are very different from each other, yet they have very similar effects. And they actually, we did research studies entirely independently before Goldie had any idea who I was. And then they use the exact same outcome studies, and these two different types of interventions produce very similar outcomes. So Goldie, maybe you could talk about Mind Up now.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, what a treat to get to know you. I mean, this really is wonderful for me. And I'm a research freak, and I'm loving, I'm not liking what I'm hearing necessarily, but the research that you're doing is so vital, because until we really know how concrete and true this is, we're not going to pay enough attention. Back in about almost 20 years ago, I created a program. The reason I did it was because I was, very simple reason, and that was I was seeing unhappiness in children. And I was also looking at the amount of drugs that were given to children to mitigate some of their anxieties. And it was alarming. I also was looking at little children who were 10, 12, 14 years old who were killing themselves. So suicide was going up, depression, anxiety, and that was then. That was right after 9/11. So I created this program only because of what I was interested in through my life, and that was brain science, meditation, understanding the effects of meditation on the brain, and understanding that there is neuroplasticity, which you brought up, realizing that this idea of that's the way I am isn't really true. The brain actually can grow, it can change, a way that our neurons fire, and so forth. So in order to really help, at that time, I created this program. And the program was really driven for me because I don't really still understand why brain science is not absolutely a mandate in our schools. We ask them to use their brain. We ask them to pay attention. We ask them to be good. We ask them to settle down. We ask them to be, not disruptive, whatever it may be. And we ask them to learn, but they don't know how their brain works. So I thought just a nascent, easy understanding of how to have them help self-regulate, because there's so much anxiety on the rise, and our children really need to understand how that works. So they learn the parts of their brain that actually they can understand, and that's from kindergarten through 8th grade, actually preschool now. And that is to understand that unless you can quiet down your amygdala, unless you understand that the midsection of the emotional part of the brain actually is quiet, and not anxious and not fearful and not angry and so forth. We learn to do that through a brain break. And a brain break is where they listen to a sound and then they focus their attention on their breath for 3 minutes, 3 times a day. What they learn is how that breathing, how that effect actually changes the biology of the brain. And how now we talk about the executive function. Now we call it the PFC, and that's what the little ones call it, the prefrontal cortex. They now know how to calm that down. They also know what it does. It helps regulate. It helps them understand their stress factor. They know how to manage their own stress. And actually, their anxiety starts to mitigate because they are now knowing that they can learn better. So what does Mind Up do? It actually supports the prefrontal cortex, or the executive function, to be able to think better, remember better, create better, listen better. And any brain that can attend for periods of time is a healthier brain. And this is ultimately what creates a healthier life. So we call it Mind Up for Life because this is a life skill. And we also do pro-social behavior. We do areas in which we do acts of kindness. We do and all of these different things, which is gratitude. It creates dopamine emission. We want to be able to have children understand how to elevate their sense of being, how to really engage with others, and how to feel not great about themselves, but good about themselves. So they're not inflated, and they're actually they're interrelated, and they actually, what they can do matters. So the prefrontal cortex and the executive function was measured. And the measurement came out fantastic by Dr. Del Diamond. Our kids in our little group of Mind Up were actually better and able to manage and regulate and their emotional quotient was much greater and their PFC was more active. The children who had no intervention actually went below the baseline, which means that our children that are not watched, our children that are not given programs will actually dip down below the base level. This is not good. So we have to pay attention to not only executive function, but programs that actually will help our children in the classroom so they can thrive and actually make much better decisions for their life.
Goldie, thank you so much. That was a beautiful summary of the Mind Up program and the power that it's having, and we'll speak more about your experience with it in just a bit. Bruce, if you could also talk to us a little bit about the Activate program.
Sure, I'd be happy to. But first I want to say there's this wonderful school district in Indiana, Evansville, Indiana, that they actually have a director of neuroeducation. Talking to her, Susan Phelps, and she told me that they've been using our program for 3 years, but they've been using Goldie's Mind Up program for the last 6 or 7 years. And she said it would have been impossible to bring the kids back as they are doing now in the context of the pandemic without the training they had been doing for several years with your program, Goldie, because that has enabled those children to just as you said, to manage their emotions and feel like they have some control over their lives in the situation. So the program I'm going to tell you about is called Activate. It consists of computer-presented executive function training exercises that are disguised to look like computer games. And then it's integrated with a specially designed set of physical exercises to be done in the classroom or in the gym, but most commonly exercise breaks in the classroom. And these physical exercises are designed to have cognitive components so they actually engage the same brain systems as do the computer exercises, but now in the context of whole body activity and social interaction. Activate was developed in my lab at Yale, and then there's a Yale startup company called C8 Sciences that is the entity that further develops and promotes and actually sells the program. So I want to disclose to you all that I have a financial interest in that company. The programs themselves are done, the training, the computer program 3 or 4 times a week in 20-minute sessions. Each of the computer exercises has many difficulty levels, 60 to 160, and the program has patented algorithms that knows the optimal time to shift a child from one task configuration, one difficulty level to another. So the program actually shapes itself to each individual child. So what we have is neuroscience powered by technology and delivered at low cost through the internet to help children. We have multiple published papers. That's why we were one of the 10 evidence-based programs recommended by the BrainFutures report. We have multiple peer-reviewed papers with sample sizes ranging from 500 to 6,000 children, demonstrating that our program improves executive function and that improvement transfers to improved math and reading. And that's what you would expect. As I said, it's from a neuroscientist point of view, it's a pretty straight shot to how to mitigate the effects of poverty and COVID on brain and executive function development, because we know that these are key functions to predict life success. We know they're compromised by poverty. So we want to intervene to produce with programs that produce repeated activation of these neural circuits to harness the brain's neuroplastic potential and produce activity-dependent growth. I call it a school lunch program for the brain for those reasons. Now, we got a gift from the Roddenberry Foundation to do one large study in an actually affluent community, and it showed that the kids who did our program compared to a control groups had greater gains in school-administered math and reading tests. And this was published in one of the leading science journals in the world, one of the Nature journals called Nature Scientific Reports. But our impact is actually greater on children from poverty for the reasons I've outlined from the neuroscience, because they're the ones whose brains, there's nothing wrong with them. They haven't had the stimulation to realize that growth potential. So again, that's why I call it a school lunch program for the brain. We actually, just like you give kids more to eat at school and they grow faster and catch up to their growth potential if they haven't had enough food, we give the brain the skills, the stimulation. Goldie's program gives them both the quieting, which is a type of stimulation. I mean, this is an interaction and active process by which you learn to control yourself. And these are skills they have not yet developed previous to that. So one example, we had a school where 91% of the kids qualified for free and reduced lunch. And the principal said, we're going to give your program to one 5th grade class and use the 2 other 5th grade classes as our control comparisons. In that school, sadly, like many others, in the control classes, 10% of the kids met proficiency in the official state exam in math, and only 20% in English. Kids who did 10 hours of our cognitive training program over the course of the school year, 60% versus 10% met proficiency in math and 80% in English. So I hope by now, with our introductory comments, that you have a sense of the neuroscience foundation of what we think is possible. Let me just add quickly that not only is there one director of neuroscience education that I've met in the US, when I gave lectures in China, the Minister of Education said, we need a neuroscience-based pedagogy for the country of China. And on top of that, they have key national laboratories to study neuroscience. The second leading laboratory in the whole of China for studying neuroscience with brain imaging and stimulation is in their School of Education, Goldie.
Oh my God. That's,
yeah.
I did not know that.
It makes sense what we're talking about. So I'll turn it back to the hosts to see for Q&A and discussion.
Thank you, Bruce and Goldie, for giving us sort of a sense of these types of programs. And again, when we talk about executive function skill building, as Bruce, you were mentioning earlier, that these are really these are fundamental to learning. They undergird, they're neural systems that undergird all learning. So if there is a deficit in these neural systems, that the fact that students aren't learning shouldn't be a mystery to us.
Well, you know how I talk about that. My comparison in the slide, if we had slides, is you can't pour water into a jar when the lid is closed.
Right.
What are our school systems trying to do? Well, the kids aren't making progress in math. Let's pour more math in. Let's pour more reading in. Hello?
Yeah.
It's not going in. You got to take the lid off.
That's right.
And I think
it's kind of the same thing as when a child is frenzied or their brain is frenzied.
Yeah.
They can't learn. Right. You know, the executive function is not functioning.
Yeah.
So, you know, you can't get in there. You know, how do you help a child learn? You first have to help them know how to calm their mind down and be more present and be more focused. And then all of a sudden they're going, oh, I can access my PFC, you know.
Yeah.
Goldie, to that point, I'm wondering if you can, so, you know, obviously you talked about a mindfulness-based program that also has social and emotional learning and brain literacy as part of it. Bruce talked about a more computer-based cognitive training program that has physical component to it. I'm wondering, to the point you were just making, what do you see as the mindfulness, the power of the mindfulness component right now to students learning, particularly in this moment? Like what you've seen in your own experience of how incorporating that component actually does address that frenzied kind of state of mind and really does prepare the child for getting more out of their school day.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, oddly enough, mindfulness back in the day, everyone thought it was a religion, which it wasn't. I mean, it's a brain exercise, basically. Mm-hmm. And what it does is when you spend a little bit more time, maybe it's around a brain break, but a little bit more time, it actually balances and calibrates out left-right brain. And in doing so, it calms everything down, which means breath, which has a lot of neurological correlates, as well as focused attention. And when you focus attend to one thing, what happens to the brain is actually quite beautiful. It gets quiet. And with that, the dog stops barking, as we do to our young children. We talk about it. And the wise owl wakes up. And when the wise owl, which is executive function or PFC, this suddenly is when they know they can access learning. What I wanted to make sure of was that we weren't just having a brain break for nothing. It wasn't about mindfulness for nothing. It was really the understanding of a cognition that they know that when they do that, something is going to happen in their brain. They will be able to access their ability to think better, to feel better, to not necessarily be reactive, because reactivity actually can negate and actually mitigate learning. They learn all this by activity. They don't learn it necessarily by just pedagogy. They learn it by their action. They understand what's happening in their own brain. So it was important to put mindfulness together with some actuality and some real concrete facts and cognition about what's really going on scientifically in your own brain, and how because of neuroplasticity, you guys get to change things the way you would like. So it gives them power, puts them back in the driver's seat. Today, more than ever, it's very, very important, as we know, that our children actually get to activate, which is one of my favorite words, their brain. And they know how to do it because we've given them the tool to do so. So I think that Mind Up, moving together with mindfulness, which of course we call it brain break, an understanding of brain science, and also knowing that certain things can create dopamine, which is giving back, acts of kindness. These things all help support an optimistic or an environment in a way that children can actually feel better. And this is, I think, but interestingly enough, no, I didn't want mindfulness in there because we were a brain-based program. And it's important to say it because I believe that that's what's going to get through. And I believe that in the future, and hopefully in my lifetime, we begin to see the value that every single teacher should learn about the brain and be prepared. And every teacher should understand that you're not just teaching math. These are human beings, and they need to also be taught ways to self-regulate, to give back, to actually put a little bit of human back in humanity. And this, and when we talk about a vision, I think that this has always been my vision, because now mindfulness can be combined with neuroscience, can be combined with positive psychology. Back in the day when I started this, and Holly, you know, is that was unheard of. I mean, you could do a program on how to be empathetic, or they had programs on how to be one thing, or, you know, watch out for, you know, abuse, or make sure whatever. But this idea of combining these things was just unheard of. Now, I'm not saying I'm a genius, but my sense was, why not?
That's such a great segue into, you know, that idea of, we want to make sure things are scientifically based. We want to make sure we're, you know, that the educators and parents that can rest assured that this is not wasting time. It's actually a gain. It's a gain in the educational value of a student's school day. Bruce, just on the being able to track some of those gains, the Activate program and programs like that, you know, that are computer based, often have these sort of administrative dashboards where in real time, teachers and administrators and district leaders can see some of those scientific impacts that Goldie was talking about. Can you share a little bit more about the power of that kind of aspect to an executive function or brain-based program, and how that informs how maybe a teacher could teach, or individualized learning plans, things like that?
Oh, that's a great question. There's so much to talk about here, and it's exciting to hear what Goldie has said about her program and the problems. Our schools face so many problems now, and these interventions at various points can have positive impact throughout the system. Early on, Education Association asked me to partner with them in a grant, and one of the outcome measures was teacher retention. I said, teacher retention? You know, we got this program to help kids develop these executive functions. She said, yeah, teachers are burned out. They're trying to manage all this stuff, which they can't. If they have 2 children, they come in with a lesson plan, they have 2 children who can't control themselves. If within a few minutes, the lesson plan, they have a choice. Forget about those 2 kids and just let them, you know, fall further and further behind, or forget about my lesson plan and try. The teachers need tools that can help them deal with this. And And that's why Susan Phelps in Evansville was so clear about the tools that had been built and developed in the kids through Mind Up so that they could do that. When you think about the tools that a teacher has now, I will move from these interpersonal skills more into some of the technology-enabled ones because we want to use everything. But when I was in classrooms with the teachers, and I would say the way they try and, what is their tool set that they can use to get kids in the right frame of mind for learning? They say, if your eyes aren't on my eyes, you're not paying attention. Now that's sort of cool and it's sort of fun, but honestly, it's pretty limited in terms of what you can do. And so you can imagine they can't spend their whole class hour like that looking at each other. So they have to be able to have the tools to carry on, like Goldie was describing, that these kids then can be partners. You enable the kids to be partners in creating a learning environment for everybody in the classroom and school. Now, one of the nice things about online things is that you can monitor stuff and you're interacting with the kids in a variety of ways. Now, I first wanted to know whether our programs were working. And honestly, after spending 25 years of research on neuroscience and neuroplasticity and developing the programs, and then I got the idea to bring them out into the school system, I was worried about how they're going to be evaluated because I'd heard that a lot of the tests that are used aren't necessarily the most reliable and sensitive. So we built in measures of formal cognitive function so we would know whether our programs were working. And then I saw, and I administer them, we administer them automatically in the program. The kids, it just happens during the course of when they're playing the game, sometimes they get an assessment that is also somewhat fun, but it's a formal research assessment done online. And now we have 100,000 of those test assessments in kids across the country. So I built those in so we could see whether or not the program worked. It turned out those are very valuable for the schools. As you said, to individualize universal design learning principles, said you want to know each child's areas of cognitive strengths and weaknesses so you can customize things. But what do they do now? It costs $4,000 or $5,000 to get a neuropsych assessment. So they don't get them on many kids. And if they do, they get one. And then who did the assessment? Was it a good day or a bad day for the child? And that one day has been used to impact and plan so much of their education. So we did build in assessments, Holly, first so we could see whether the program worked and so we could continuously improve it. I know if the programs aren't better 5 years from now than they are now, we fail because we can collect all this information constantly, every keystroke from every child. So we have 300 million data points. And then we can use those to continually evaluate the algorithms to make the interventions better. And then we have these assessment reports that we can generate automatically to the teachers to have, and then to print out reports to share with parents or use in planning meetings. Another dimension is implementation. The schools get hit, teachers get hit with so many new things to do every year. They got so many problems managing their classroom. There's a book written about what goes on behind the classroom door. You really don't, and I've heard quotes from teachers say, well, we've got the first thing we ask at the beginning of the year, we're given these 10 new programs. Which one do we think is not going to be around in the next couple of years? Because then we can ignore that one. They're overloaded and implementation is a real problem. One thing we can do is track implementation constantly because we know every time a child logs on and whether they do the programs or not. And then that gives a possibility to identify classrooms that are having problems and then to provide support specifically for those teachers in those classrooms. And then we realized that when kids are logging on, we wanted to make some changes in the program to help them engage more. And I said, oh, well, we can ask them how much they're liking the games, right? With little smiley faces. And then we make these changes. That's what a marketing company does, right? So why can't we turn this technology that's used for so many other purposes and for making money primarily and marketing research, why can't we turn that and use it, actively for positive purposes like education? So we wanted to know whether or not the kids liked the games more after we made some changes. We put some smiley faces up there. We make these changes and then they rate, I like the games, I don't like the games stink, whatever. And then we get, in a couple of weeks, thousands of responses and we can decide what we're going to do. And then I thought, well, we can ask the kids more questions. If we ask them one question a day, we can ask them, how do you like school? Do you think you're a good reader? Do you enjoy playtime? And we could then become interesting questions, come what do you do with that information? And we're very careful about all of it, but we feel an obligation, if we have enough information to say there's some problem that some children are having, then we should share that with the teachers and let them know that the limitations in our information. But if we have a child that doesn't feel good about themselves, actually says they're depressed, we might find out about it this way. So yes, Ollie, the technology enables a variety of data gathering that is useful in multiple ways.
Thank you so much. Goldie, Bruce spoke about a couple of points that I wanted to follow up on. One is teacher retention, and the other is this idea of, another program that we have to, another silver bullet, which is a very understandable feeling that teachers have when they've been implementing programs that haven't necessarily worked.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that Mind Up, you were kind of a pioneer in having to address some of those concerns and explaining to teachers and to administrators that these types of programs are not curricular add-ons, that they're integrated, and that they not only benefit the students, but that they also can benefit teachers and
Right.
get at that teacher retention. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about some of the maybe anecdotes that you've come across, just in terms of how the program has not only impacted the students and their learning, but also has impacted teachers and school climate.
Yeah, well, first of all, we have a myriad of stories of teachers that really walked by a Mind Up classroom and went, "Why are your kids so good? Why are we're taking shots, right? When they're inoculations, why are they not crying where ours are?" These are kinds of things that we did here, but when you realize that your teachers are overwhelmed, my mission always was to give them the program because it will help them. They need to understand they're not just doing this for the children. They're also doing it for them, because rarely does anyone do anything for them. Is that they don't realize they are stressed. They go home, they have their own personal issues. They have to learn about how to self-regulate themselves. They need to learn about how to focus attention enough to be able to look at basically an intention, to be happier, to be more present for your children. This self-awareness that comes around with the children also can come around with you. And so we have on our website, and we're also working with teacher care. And teacher care was something that we talked about back in the day, and when we were spending time together, you and I, and where a lot of people actually focused in on that then. Teacher care, I think this should be in every single teacher's college. Everything these teachers need to know when they go into the field, because it only takes 4 years, or at least something like that, for a teacher to leave the force. We want teachers to actually feel more, feel better and have the tools. So ultimately we have decided that, not decided, but we're having a teacher care course online, which we are creating now on our online program, because it's vital. The other part is parents. So parents have come to us and said, "I love this for my child, it's amazing, but we need this, we need this." So I wrote the book, 10 Mindful Minutes, for that reason. But what I learned is that it became a big book, but not because of me. It became a book because it's what people needed. Parents also need to have the program. They need to understand it. So we've been having parent programs here and in the UK, we also there, and it's been amazing. What parents are beginning to learn, not only about their children, but about themselves. So self-regulation, lack of reactivity, these kinds of things that you can actually benefit from will actually enhance basically your life in a very positive way. So Mind Up, we changed Mind Up a little bit, so it isn't just for schools. And we put the other byline, which is Mind Up for Life, because it is for life. It's something that you can use and tools that you can use for the rest of your life. So our teachers are vitally important, and they need to have this care. But ultimately, nobody's going to take care of them but them. So these tools that we give them are tools that they will be able to use throughout their life. And that, I think, is important in all ways, for I can stop violence, stop anger, a lot of things that these kind of programs can do. And it's simple. So the other thing when we talk about teachers are getting all these programs, they're completely overwhelmed. The one thing on this program, which is really interesting, because I see that, and I see the amount of things to do on these programs and boxes and stuff, and here's to do this and try that and the thing. And it's all under the beautiful thing of social emotional learning, and I don't put any of it, but it's a lot. I have taken my mind up and tried to keep it as simple as possible. And the online program that we're doing now, I have said to the people who are developing it, I want white space. I want teachers to be able to feel what Mind Up is and enjoy the process of learning about it as if it's for them. I want the colors to be right. I want the sounds to be right. I don't want it so complicated that you've got 18,000 things to do, because it's not. It's simple to be able to apply this to yourself and to your classroom. So all of these things that you're talking about, I completely wholeheartedly have been thinking about for a long time. Keep it simple and make sure that teachers know that this is for them too.
Thank you. Well, we have covered a lot of ground in this conversation so far. We've talked about how executive function skills that are fostered by programs that, whether they're mindfulness-based programs or executive function specific training programs, can actually interrupt the achievement gap. We've talked about how they are fundamental to making sure students get the most out of the learning, that even a great teacher is going to have a hard time putting more content in if those executive function skills aren't developed. We've talked about the equity issue and how critical it is in helping students address the effects of poverty and or adverse childhood experiences. We've talked about teacher retention and the benefits that teachers get, both in being able to have better classroom environments, but also better internal environments as they also benefit from these programs. And also be able to teach more pointedly to the core underlying issue that might be, other than what might be presenting in a child's behavior. So I just thank you both for this rich discussion. And I know that we have other questions that have come in. So I am going to pass it over to Glenda again, and she'll ask some wrap-up questions. But Goldie and Bruce, thank you both so much. It's always an honor and pleasure to be with you both.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you again.
And I always learn something from you, Bruce.
We're not finished with you too, but I want to thank you for that beautiful discussion and really all encompassing. But we still have questions from the audience and from me. So if we can make the answer short, because I have 5 or 6 questions. The first one says, what advice would you offer to parents who would be looking to advocate for executive function programs at their schools? Could either of you answer that? Parents wanting to make sure they have one or both of these programs in their schools because they realize how important this work is.
Parents is really interesting for the parents. I think there's a way, Bruce, actually to go and look online and find out some of these programs that are out there. I personally think that what Bruce is doing is extraordinary. I think brain must be involved. So one has to look at these various programs that they could find in social emotional learning, CASEL, and choose the one that you think is the best one. And then there's a phone like we have Hello Mind Up or whatever, you end up calling that number. And the other part is this, parents can do a lot, but it's the principal and it's the school superintendent and it's the teachers that have to buy into it. So it's really, really important. That's why research is so important. And so I wish everybody luck, and I would say band together and make sure that you're not necessarily overspending for these programs, these life skills, these way of being, but good for them.
I would add to that the BrainFutures report, and that's a great tool for them. And they should bring that and make sure that the principals read it. It provides a foundation for why executive function is critical, and gives 10 evidence-based programs from a third-party perspective. And then as Goldie said, if they find some programs they're interested in, They could get more information by just inquiring, and there could be little packets that could be put together for groups of parents. I think the parents could be very important advocates in some school systems for getting this adoption here.
Yeah, I do too. That's why I say hold together, you know, put a group together. Yeah, no, absolutely. BrainFutures, that's it. Okay, take a look. Those are the primary best of the best, I think.
You're right, and they've been vetted. When we think of preparing students for future jobs and industries and economies that don't exist yet, why are EF skills, executive function skills, so important? Are they still important?
They're even more important. Yeah. Go ahead.
You go, Bruce.
Please.
Okay. They're even more important because these are the skills that enable you to keep learning. We think about cognitive flexibility. We talk about working memory. Not only that, we just put in a grant application yesterday, I think, to the Department of Education. And it turns out, and this was to support of STEM. So you're talking about STEM would be a type of curriculum that would be helping to create a workforce that would be appropriate for our country's needs, right? Going forward. So first of all, our argument is if kids aren't proficient in math in elementary school, they're not going to be interested in STEM, and they're not going to be able to do well in STEM, their self-image. So you have to start to develop these basic, and we know that executive function is essential and improves learning math. But in addition, there's other research that shows that executive functions are particularly important, specifically for computer programming. So we have the general argument that executive function is lifelong learning skills, and that education has moved beyond, the obligation of schools have moved beyond making sure that kids have a certain set of content facts to making sure they know how to regulate themselves to be productive, happy people and can continue to learn. Because the facts and as you say, Glenda, the expectations and the roles they'll have to fill, can't anticipate now. If we start training them for those now, they're not going to be what they need later. They need to shift the focus from this content material that used to be the main goal, to learn enough content to be a good citizen of the country. That's still important, but they have to have the cognitive abilities and the self-control and the executive function to participate effectively. Yeah.
So I want to add to that too, because I mean, that's very, very important. But what I'm discovering today is that oftentimes the people that are in the world of computer, in the world of looking at this, and STEM is one, but what they're lacking, with all due respect, is aspects of our humanity that actually are making working together very difficult. There is this word called grit. It's my favorite word. I look at our young workforce today, and people are having trouble hiring because a lot of the people in our workforce today are actually wanting to leave early. They really don't want to work overtime without. There's a lack of connectivity, if you will, with this. It makes it very difficult and quite different than it was, let's say, when we were young. You know, listen, if you learn to play hockey and you're a hockey player, you're gonna have grit when you get older. I was a ballet dancer, you have grit. There are things that actually can build more grit and more connectivity. And I think that's why the SEL, the idea of understanding executive function, knowing what executive function can actually do, understanding what empathy is, and how we want to create something for the greater good. An idea that it's not just about us, that there is this part of us, it's a growing organism, right, that we all have a part in. I think that's important too.
Thank you both. Another question. Is it true that executive function deficits can be mistakenly categorized as a learning disability? And on the other hand, could they be miscategorized as a mental health or behavioral disorder? So
executive functions are so important. If you look at learning disorders, if you start with a diagnostic or a category of a learning disorder, and then you study those children, they almost all have executive function problems. So the question, sets up a little bit of artificiality here, the artificial distinction. In mental health problems, executive functions are compromised in almost every one. Substance abuse, depression, schizophrenia, and ADHD. Now, our program actually is a non-pharmacologic treatment for ADHD. It works for 53% of kids. Just without medicine, it works just as well as medicine would, because executive functions are so important in these things. And it's not a surprise when we consider the centrality of the ability to regulate yourself, regulate your mood. It's in depression, it's the models of depression, the brain models of depression are an imbalance of these systems where the executive function systems like Goldie's been talking about are no longer able to regulate the emotions, and then they become overwhelmed further. It shifts around and the emotions further and further overwhelm the executive functions. So executive function is the center of all of this.
Thank you. This is a little bit off something we haven't covered. One of our audience is saying, could Goldie and Dr. Wexler comment on the internet and social media and how we can protect our children's developing brains? And what this person is actually talking about is this young man called Tristram, I don't have his name, but he's just put out a documentary on the social media and how the social media companies are, so to speak, pinging and manipulating our children's brains in a way that they aren't aware of and parents are not aware of either. And she is asking, she is a psychiatrist, by the way, who's asking, but she's asking, how can we protect our children's brains from manipulation by the social media companies? I think it's a really important question.
That's a really important question. And I know, Bruce, you've got some ideas on that, so I'll be short.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, this is, I hate to say it, but this is what it is. It's where parenting comes in. You've got to stop your children from getting online all the time. They also aren't old enough yet to process things. So their executive function is just developing. Their brain is just developing. So we have to realize that a developing brain can only accept so much information at once, number one. And number two, may not have the experience to differentiate one thing from the other. So I feel like, and you can go further on this one, but I think that it's a parent job to be tough and to say, no, this is enough. You've had this for a certain amount of time and we're not going to do this now. And it's quite hard to do, but there's no one that's going to legislate it other than a parent, because no one has the, when there's money concerned and when there's a lack of, I think a lack, I'm going to say empathy, because if you have it, you have to realize that, you know, your job is to basically put something out there, but you're looking for money, you're looking for all the wrong things. And actually, you know, kind of trying to, you know, bring people into, hooking them into something. And I think it's just like psychological warfare. So I'm going to throw the next one to you because I'm very passionate about this.
You know, I agree with everything you said. The question has so many dimensions to it and worries that people have. First of all, we can say some people worry just about screen time per se. And for me, the issue there is more what you do on those screen time. Because I would say to parents, well, if the child was reading classical novels for 2 hours a day, but happened to be reading on their tablet instead of on a book, would you be so concerned? So it's what the technology is being used for, in part. Now, the technology, though, does have certain features that make it potentially more problematic, because the ability to do level of stimulation, the level of arousal, and the skills that these computer people have to engage people. I mean, the reason, what do the computer people want to do who are making games? They have one goal: to get the kids to use them more and more and more. That's called addiction. Right. And they actually activate some of the same brain regions. So these are important issues. And I think just like with drugs, like Goldie says, it's a parent responsibility. Beyond that, there are other interesting questions about what's the difference between being stimulated by, you know, face-to-face versus other types of talking, but I know you want to keep the answers brief.
I know, what an interesting subject, but you and I, Bruce, will talk about that, because I'm fascinated with what you know and I don't.
There is a big, you know, full class or full feature film coming out about it. I think it's called The Social Media Dilemma or something like that. And it's going to be fascinating, because what we understand is that the companies, without our permission, are doing this pinging. And every time a child either answers a ping or looks at the device, it's a dopamine shot, and they don't have any idea. So Goldie, it's why you're saying the parents are trying to get the kids off, but they can't help thinking, I want more of this.
Yeah.
And
That's the arousal and addiction part, Glenda.
Yeah.
Arousal and addiction.
so we at least want to bring up the subject, make parents aware they're fighting a one side, they're fighting a giant or a couple
Yeah,
of
they're fighting a giant, and a lot of it's financial. I really, it's upsetting, and I know what you mean. I remember in the day when I thought, well, we're running the 9/11 tapes over and over again, so children think it's happening over and over and over again. Please be responsible. Our news people, our people in the media, where's your level of responsibility when you're seeding young minds? That was then.
Yeah.
Now it's like the train left the station, and it's scary. So how we actually can mitigate some of the negative effects of this, and I don't know. Bruce, you'll come up with something.
I think we are bringing it to the public's attention, and we will certainly dwell on this some more in another expert series. Maybe the last question, if I can read this. Similar to physical fitness campaigns that brought regular exercise into the schools, or school meal programs that recognize the importance of nutrition for learning, it seems like our nation's schools would benefit from an EF brain fitness campaign.
Yeah.
Is there a public-private partnership that could be helpful here? Really, that's the basic question. More EF program implementations in the public schools. What would it take?
Right. What would it take? And I think Bruce and I agree, but yet I don't know, because this is an antiquated system, and it's very hard to get the education system to actually wrap themselves around anything innovative and new. It's such an old system. We have to change it and so forth. But we just can't get enough research. The more research we get, the more proof we have. It becomes an indefensible and unarguable truth. And that is that we've got to get this into our schools ASAP. Nothing better than mental health, mental fitness, and actually more productivity and optimism in our country. And I think that's just an irrefutable truth.
Bruce, thank you.
I agree entirely, but the challenges are huge. I mean, I've been knocking my head against them in ways I never imagined I would. When I had done this research in my lab for years about neuroplasticity and brought this program out, I had no idea. I thought that would be all you had to do, but no, and to actually get it implemented. And I could tell you stories. I know we don't have much time for it, but we had a school system with a $1 billion annual budget. There are 15 of them in the US with that size budget. They spent $30,000 on our program, got fantastic results. The superintendent and chief academic officer moved to another city. The new leadership came in. They didn't even want to spend $30,000 on it. And it was more evidence-based than most of what they were doing.
Right.
And nothing in terms of money. So we need to compete against forces that are entrenched and have a lot of resources behind them. Yeah.
I'll ask one last small question. Either what keeps you up at night, or really what makes you optimistic about what's going on today? Maybe the latter one.
What keeps me up at night?
Optimism. I don't mean about COVID. I mean about what's going on in EF in the schools.
In the schools?
Yes.
Yeah. It's not a whole personal question we're being asked, I don't think. Yeah.
No,
okay.
No, I'm kidding. Yeah.
Unless being hungry at night wakes you up. So anything.
Yeah. No, I like the question. Yeah. You want to think, Goldie, or you want to answer first?
No, I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, I could say this one. So what keeps me up and what makes me optimistic sometimes are the same things. I mean, and it's excitement about learning, the stuff we're learning, and the excitement about the potential to be able to make a difference. But there's more than one thing that keeps me up at night, unfortunately. You want to know what keeps me up at 2 a.m. or what keeps me up at 4 a.m.? Then there's the worry, of course, about whether, with all the effort that I've put into this and other people, but me personally at night, how much effort I put in this over many years, as a scientist, and one scientific life and a committed citizen, of the world and wanting to bring that knowledge out is a feeling that, I won't succeed.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I think the optimism I have is about the time we're living in now is that I do believe, and my optimistic mind is that more people are becoming more alert, more aware, if you will, of the need for mental health interventions, of ways that we're going to be able to sustain some more preventative measures because mental health is now becoming, right in the forefront of some of our more important obstacles that we're dealing with in the world, basically. So I think the bad news is the good news. And that is that we're in trouble. People don't know where to go. And I think we're realizing right now that not only is 2 and 2 important and ABC is important and all of that, but to balance out our brain, create a better executive function, to be able to actually create more health that will take people into the next part of our world and be able to have more ability to deal with some of the issues, maybe some of the problems that we're going to be having, and have a more cohesive world. And that's the way I look at it. And I probably will never stop looking at it. And if there's such a thing as reincarnation, I'm quite sure I'm coming back to continue the crusade.
So I'll play this part of the presentation when I have trouble sleeping at night, Goldie.
Okay, great.
And thinking about you in the next life with the same bits. Well, I wanted to tell, besides thanking you for your both brilliant discussions today, heartfelt, brilliant, and gracious, and Holly too, I want to tell you what Aspen Brain Institute may be doing in the next year. We are going to try to create Aspen just temporarily as a model brain health community. And in doing so, the first thing I want to do is try to get each of your programs in some part of our school system.
Great.
And that'll be the very first thing we do toward trying to create something like a blue zone, but of a brain health community.
Good.
And I think if we have a crystal looking, something repeatable or scalable thing that we can, as one of you said, Goldie, I think more research, more proof, and you said the same thing, Bruce, that's what we want to do, bring attention to this, all of the subjects that we've discussed today. So I'll definitely be in touch with both of you in the future, and I hope we can take this thing to the public, Goldie, before the next millennium or before the next lifetime. So thank you all again. Thanks to our audience for their questions. Thanks for us becoming educated on the science of brain health. And please know that these programs are being recorded and people can come to aspenbraininstitute.org and ask for a recording of this exciting program. I hope we can send this to teachers all over.
I do too.
Great idea. Great idea.
I mean, this has been an excellent rounded discussion. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Glenda.
Welcome. You're welcome. And ciao, everyone.
Oh, lots of love. Bye, Holly. Bye, Bruce. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.